Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and empowers you to live a more vibrant second half. If you find us today on YouTube, please remember to ring that bell so you don't miss any more conversations. And if you are on a podcast platform, please remember to subscribe and to share this conversation so that we can build our tribe together. Today, we're going to be talking about mindset. My guest wants you to know that whatever is going on inside of your head is often the things that are keeping you stuck and held back in life. She's going to share some strategies to help you change your mindset and get you unstuck from those limiting thoughts. My guest today is Alison Hall. She is a transformational coach. Alison, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. I'd love to hear, what is it about those limiting thoughts in our mindset that makes you so passionate about this message?
Yeah, my background is in, I spent years in corporate America, and like so many people, just like me and just like in my age group, we are the folks who got burnt out and moved on to something else. So many of us, and I know many in your audience can relate to that. So that was me. I decided I needed more purpose and meaning in my life, just fulfillment. You know how you're going through the grind every day, you're spending 60 hours doing something, but you come home and you don't feel like you've really accomplished anything. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to accomplish something. So I started out as a personal trainer. When I first got out of corporate America, I decided to be a personal trainer. I was interested in fitness. I loved it. I grew the business, but I kind of grew myself out of what I really enjoyed doing, which was helping people individually. I had trainers doing that, and I was just running a business. I'm a CPA, so I have a financial background. So I decided to find something that could help women specifically in a financial way. At the time, I had a bunch of friends, oddly, who were getting divorced. So I figured that would be a great industry to go into, frankly, from an economic standpoint and as a good way to help women generally. So I became a certified divorce financial analyst, and I started a business helping women get their finances together in order to go through divorce and be prepared, financially after divorce. And what I found was that what I was helping people with more than anything else was to get through the transition. I kind of became a coach of sorts. While I was doing the financial work, what I was really doing was helping them get a new mindset about their lives and get their heads straight for where they were going next. And that's kind of how I ended up just becoming that's one of the biggest transitions. Transitions are transitions. It doesn't really matter what it is. We all have to kind of go through them in a certain kind of way. And that's how I came upon my true passion, which is helping women through major life transitions and moving on in their lives. So what it all ends up, everything, we all know this, everything ends up being about what's in your head and how you view things. And, I've given you a very long answer to what was a relatively short question. But what I was discovering was that it was specifically with divorce, but you could apply it to anything. The way people perceived the situation they had already gone through was exactly how they were going to go forward in the future, right? So if you're thinking, just a simple example, if you're thinking about your soon-to-be or your ex-husband and how horribly he treated you and how, poorly you came out of the situation, obviously your mindset is in a kind of almost like a victim mentality, which means all the things that you do, all the decisions that you make going forward are from the perspective of a victim. So working with clients, typically the first thing we're doing is just trying to reframe whatever it is you have perceived that's happened to you. So that's how we get, where we're going.
It is amazing how powerful what we think is. It's a neuroscience conversation, actually, right? It's what you tell your brain says, this is what is true, so this is what we will look for.
Exactly.
What you focus on grows. People hear that and it feels like a kitschy little statement, but it's really the truth in the way our brain works. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you watch little children, and if they have been sort of conditioned to feel as if potentially a child has maybe, parents that are kind of hoverers and kids don't make any decisions of their own, right? They're kind of taught to believe that they're not decision makers. And so they're constantly asking questions, or as they grow up, constantly allowing other people to make decisions for them. So it can start young. And if you don't become aware of it and break the cycle or make a change for yourself, once you are aware of the things that you're doing, you'll just continue on in the same vein. And I know that, having listened to your podcast, I get the impression that your tribe is all about reinvention, always moving to find joy, finding better ways to do things as opposed to just trying to get by,
Yeah, that would be the goal. I mean, I think that's the most impactful work, to your point, Alison, is to become aware.
Yes, right.
And once you're aware, then you're in a power position, right? It's that's what we're thinking, and we don't even know what we're thinking. And how do you help people recognize? Like for me, it's what are you saying to and about yourself? That's kind of like a GPS back to what's happening in your head. But how do you help people become aware? And what steps can you encourage them to consider taking? Because it is difficult to change your mindset. You've been thinking it, especially in midlife. Gee, you could have been thinking this since you were 5.
Exactly. And to your point, that's exactly where we start. We started with the stories. So I work with people who are proactively trying to make change. It's typically something specific has happened or hasn't happened to make them come to somebody like me. But we're all in transition all the time. And these are things that they happen to do it with me, but they could do it on their own. And so sometimes it is about getting a piece of paper and just writing things down. Some people like to journal, other people don't. But if you can be intentional about it, doing exactly what you said, write down the stories about this specific circumstance. Using divorce is a great example. What is this story? Describe what happened. Describe the marriage, from start to end. You don't have to take 10 pages to do it, but how did it start? How was it in the middle? How was it at the end? Right. And when you read that back to yourself, that gives an indication of how you perceived yourself in the situation. As I said before, were you a victim? Were you a perpetrator? All the different things that you could have been in the situation. And also pay attention to and write down the stories, as you mentioned as well, the stories that you're telling to friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to get on autopilot. It could be about divorce. It could be about a bad work or perceived bad work situation. There's so many things in life that happen. My child who is challenging. What are the stories that you're telling to your friends and family? And you really have to start to listen to yourself. It's easier to do that. Well, it's never easy. It's easier to do it when you have someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's a coach or a therapist or, a close friend or family member, to try to reflect back the stories that you're telling to other people. It's invaluable to really hear yourself because we don't typically hear ourselves. We're always moving to the next thing. We're not stopping to examine ourselves or our motives. So that's the first place I typically start with people. And it's for me to get to understand my clients as well as for them to kind of hear themselves.
Mm-hmm. I know I've used that tactic like in an onboarding conversation. You just ask a bunch of questions and then I just type out whatever they're telling me when there's impactful statements. And often they're surprised at what they hear. They'll read it and be like, where did you get this piece of information? And it's like, well, you said that. And they don't even know. Right.
Absolutely.
And I think about that often. The things that we repeat often tell us something about ourselves, don't they?
Absolutely. Those are our stories. That's our storyline. We all have a storyline. It's just like any television show. There are characters. You're a character. You're the central character in your storyline. And again, we're rarely paying attention to what we're saying until we become, mindful. And that takes some work, particularly I would say particularly for women who have so many things typically going on, so many responsibilities. The last person you tend to pay attention to is yourself. And that's why, in my opinion, women in, call it midlife or a certain season or whatever, tend to have a little bit of difficulty having these conversations with themselves or these come to Jesus kind of moments because they haven't spent a lot of time being self-reflective because they haven't had the time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And now perhaps the nest is empty or, you're changing or downsizing in terms of your work life. This is when we now have the time to do it, and it comes crashing in.
I've often found that we like our stories. They validate certain parts of who we believe we are, right? Like they become comfort blankets. And maybe once we become aware, do you come up against that challenge of people who really need that story for their identity?
Absolutely. I think we all do. Even those saying perhaps you are now an empty nester. So many women, their identity is directly related to being a parent, as it should be. It's a phase of life when your primary responsibility very often is raising children, but it becomes who you are. And when that role goes, well, am I? And it's so interesting to find so many women who are no longer, raising children in their home, who still identify solely with that particular role. And it can be anything else that you identify with, but absolutely. It's difficult to go on with your life when something is snatched away, right? I mean, if you have been the caretaker for your husband, very often women are the people who are, making the household run. Maybe now he's retired and no longer needs all of the things that you were doing. So who am I? What's my role? And it's, that's why we have these types of conversations.
I find it very impactful for myself to tune in to the conversations I'm having, and recognize, oh, why do I say that? Or why have I said that so often?
Right.
It could be from a curiosity place, just it's the thing that's on my mind. It doesn't necessarily have to be a story. And I think sometimes depending on who we're spending time with and who's impacting our lives in terms of input, even as grown women, that's something to evaluate too. Don't you agree? Like, where's this story coming from? Where did it come from? Are you around people that might not be the most mentally healthy for you to spend that much time with,
That's absolutely true, because by nature, we are people who compare, Americans particularly, we compare ourselves to others constantly. I don't think we really intend to do it, but social media, all the things, right? And who you surround yourself with sort of, that determines how you are going to perceive yourself and how you're going to present yourself. And the more you present yourself in a particular way, the more you perceive that that's who you are. So you're right. I mean, it's just kind of a circular circumstance, but it can be hard, right? You may have outgrown a group of people or a set of people, right? It may not be that they're bad for you. It just may not be that they are in the right place or in the same place that you are in now, or in a place where you're going. It's just like when you have a job, when we're young and you have a job and people tell you, well, try to aspire to be or behave in a manner in which you would behave if you had that next job up, right? If you look at our lives on a continuum, if you are trying, transition to different things or improve or have a bigger life, sometimes you have to aspire to having friends or surrounding yourself with people who are perhaps closer to where you want to go than where you have been and you're trying to get away from.
Because those relationships kind of call you to a different conversation sometimes, right? If you're with someone who's like, hey, what, why do you say that? Or why do you believe that? People like, you say that a lot. Like, why is that? There are people out there who will kind of call you on your stuff and in gently kind of, or maybe not so gently,
right, exactly.
Call you out.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. And that's a lot of times where growth comes from, right? Mm-hmm. You can get stuck in a habit. It may not even people you're surrounding yourself with are, as I said, they may not be bad influences, but maybe we're all just sort of stuck here together. And there's nothing wrong with continuing to have them as friends, but it's also great to aspire to some other things, even just simple things like maybe you have I know that art is your passion, apparently, yes. Right? Yeah. You may have some passion that you haven't, I know you had a guest on who started an art business later in life, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe there's something that you're interested in, that you want to join a meetup group or join a club or something like that and meet people who have similar interests, but they're doing different things and you have different conversations. Sometimes we just have to get out of our own way and, shake things up.
I think that's a big part of transformation. When you think about, like, if you're going to change your environment at home, you often buy new furniture or you repaint the walls a different color or you get new throw pillows, right? It's like, it's the same application technically, isn't it? To
Absolutely.
ourselves.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's just a bigger environment, it's like the people you surround yourself with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's also, as you kind of alluded to, when you are with new people or people who haven't known you forever in a particular environment, they're much more likely to ask you questions, whether they're being probing or not. It's usually just curiosity, but it does give you the opportunity to self-reflect. Why do I say those things? Or why do I think that? I don't know. Yeah, and just kind of be more present about who you actually are.
Because the people who know us nod their head in agreement because they see us through those glasses.
Absolutely. They always have. And there's no reason to change that. Let's just keep it moving along. That's the general thought, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned journaling as a strategy. Obviously, coaching is a strategy. What are some other ways that people can begin to shift their mindset or begin to create an environment where they can move in a more positive direction and transform the way that they're perceiving their lives?
Yeah, it's the first thing we talked about was kind of looking retrospectively, but another is just looking toward the future. Anything we do, this is common knowledge, anything we do right now is going to affect us in the future, right? So if I eat, hopefully that will impact how long I get to live in a healthy body going forward, right? So if I'm thinking toward the future about where I want to go, like using divorce again, I ask my clients, okay, once we get to this point, okay, so where would you like to be when all the ink is dry and the kids are back in school and everything's kind of running smoothly? 5 years from now, 5 years is a good number. People can actually think about that. 20 gets a little weird, but 5 years from now, where would you like to be? What would you like to have? Like very specific, tangible things. It's a simple exercise that anybody can do. You can do it by yourself with, again, a little piece of paper, a little journal. And maybe you don't get everything the first time you do it. Maybe it's something that you do a little bit in the morning and over a period of a week or a couple of weeks, just kind of adding on. What would that really look like? It's fun to get into it. At a certain point, though, you stop that aspect of it and you read it back and you look at the things that you think, well, that's reasonable. And then you start to put together the things that you could do right now. What things could I do today, this week, this month, this year that would affect the trajectory of me getting there? It's crazy fun. And it makes you feel empowered. And I think sometimes that's a lot of what we need in order to gain confidence to move away from where we are now or where we may feel stuck or, where our closed in on ourselves. Sometimes just looking and thinking and daydreaming. It's one of the most fun things in the world to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it does require now, practically speaking, after you do all this, it does require that you take action. I mean, closing the book and marching away is not going to help you, get out of where you are now or move toward what you're excited about. So you do have to take action. But I always say in the action category, don't pick more than, say, a couple, 2, 3 things. Because when we give ourselves this laundry list of things to do, it's just like when you have a to-do list at home, and you have 72 things on it. You might get 3 finished and then you just say, this is overwhelming, never mind, I'm going to watch Netflix,
Yeah.
So when you give yourself 2, 3 action items and they're well defined, then you can start to build up some confidence and you're starting to make progress and you feel good about adding 2, 3 more things. And that's how we get out of our seats and get moving toward the future in the direction that you want to go. Because somebody's got to steer the wheel. If you don't steer it, you're going somewhere as long as you're alive. But if you're not steering the wheel, then the world is just kind of steering it for you. And I think that's what happens a lot. We get mired in doing nothing. And,
Yeah. As you're talking about visioning for the future, I think as we grow, that vision grows too. Like things that we might have wanted when we were 20 might have changed by the time we turned 30. So I think having an open mind and open hands, I suppose, it to what we think from right now, what we'd want in 5 years is such a great motivator, because it's the possibility, it's the potential, to rise above where we feel we're stuck at the moment. The journey to get there is the thing that we can't predict, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. There's always something. There's always a wrench. Right.
Yeah. But if you know that going in, I always say you already know what this life is like this. Right. You already know. So why not try something different? Like if you're not happy with this and you already know that if I do this, I get this and I don't like this. The logic then is, okay, so what are you going to do different?
Exactly. Do something different. And you know what? You're absolutely right. By this point in life, also, what we've learned is that life is always going to throw, wrenches into the situation. Things are never going to go in some linear pattern. But at this point, most of us have built up a little bit of resilience. So we know what it means to get kicked down. And that's why we're here. We've had some transitions and this is where we are, right? So we know how to get back up. We know how to get back on the horse. And that's all, when you try something new, if it doesn't work out, there's always something else to try. It sounds trite, but that's how we've been getting along in the world heretofore. So it's just being thoughtful about it. We're not accustomed to really thinking about it and planning it out. We usually just do, and then something happens and we deal with it. In this case, you're being proactive. That's all, and it feels good to take charge of your own life in that way. We are all resilient enough at this point to know that if we fall off of the horse, we can still get back on. And to your point, again, if this isn't working, something else might. And if the next thing doesn't work, that's okay. Something else will. It's the same thing we would have told our children, or the same thing we do tell our children, or told them if they're already raised at this point. So that's not unlike anything else we would have ever done. But sitting again and doing nothing is not going to get us anywhere. So, and sometimes also, again, back to the thoughts in our head, we kind of touched on that in the beginning, but really, when you think about all of the thoughts that you have every day, we have so many more thoughts than we're even aware of. And the vast majority of them have a tendency to be negative, which is so fascinating, because a situation can be, you can look at everything is a glass half full, a glass half empty, really, almost everything. And that's another little tool I use in coaching that people can do for themselves as well. We were talking about conversations that you have with other people or even with yourself. Think about how you framed something. And again, if you have a partner to do this with, it's a lot easier because they can kind of mirror back what you said. But then after you realize what you've said, or you're aware of what you've said, and if you have to do it alone, you could record yourself, whatever. Try to flip it around and say it more positively. An example would be, well, I'm afraid that I won't be able to earn enough. Okay, that's a typical thing that people think of, particularly when you're looking at maybe trying a new career or moving away from what you're doing, right? That's a way to that's kind of a closed mindset, right? Uh-oh, I'm not going to earn enough, so I won't do anything in that regard. What's the flip? There's lots of flips. The flip side could be, I'm an intelligent person. I've persevered. I've gotten over, lots of hills and obstacles. Chances are pretty good that I'm going to succeed, particularly because I'm motivated. So there's so many ways that you could just reframe positively. And the more you do that, you have to be very present to be able to do that. Because again, we have all these things that are all these thoughts in our heads all of the time. And there's the inner critic, who's always having sort of negative things to say, but all those things are going on and we're not really paying attention to them. When you start to try to listen to yourself and then take the time to reframe, that means you're forcing yourself to really think and take a minute and take a beat and not just assume that the negative thought is the true thought. It doesn't have to be. Why does it have to be? Just because your mind has decided that is in fact the case.
Mm-hmm. I like to use the question, is it true?
Yeah.
Take my thoughts to court. That's how I view it. It's like, okay,
That's exactly it. Yeah, I love that. Take my thoughts to court. Yeah. Because
now
there's a
let's
judge and a jury in there already, you know?
absolutely
Yeah.
not a very nice one.
No.
Let's talk about reframing because we use the word because we're used to it.
Mhm.
But if this is it seems obvious, but let's talk about what reframing actually looks like for someone.
Okay. Yeah, to me, it relates back to that glass half empty kind of concept that we're all familiar with. So that's an easy one. But really, it's just looking at the way that you think of something in a different way. It doesn't have to be the complete opposite either. It can be a different version of something. Again, with the using the example of I'll never earn enough. A reframe, just a slight reframe, could be even a question to yourself. How much money do I really need to earn? That turns the whole thing. I'll never earn enough is a very, that's a very closed statement. There's no room for anything else other than, well, that's that. How much do I need to earn? It opens the door to possibilities. It opens your mind to think about, well, that's a great question. Let's kind of look at our expenses. There's lots of things you can do there. It's an open-ended thing. And then, the other example I gave was the complete opposite of which is I'm smart. People don't, women particularly sometimes can't make that huge transition to the opposite. Yes, way to go. I can do it. If we all could do that, well, we'd all be fantastic and no bad things would ever happen in life. Right? But that's not the case. The case is that sometimes you just have to take incremental steps to getting to that true reframe, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's progress. It's all progress.
Mm. Incremental is important. I think that's a kind of a key word for the process is we often need to, in the process of growing and changing and reinventing, it's so good to give ourselves credit for where we've come, how far we've come, no matter how far it is. Like, I feel like we look for those big leaps and bounds when reality is it comes by degrees, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I will say to you, I am not a big journaler personally, but I recommend it for clients for whom it's a good fit because that's a great way to chronicle just everyday wins, right? Sometimes we don't do that. I was talking to a friend literally yesterday. We were talking, she had a laundry list of things that she had been putting off. She's kind of an avoider and she acknowledges that. And she was saying that she had paid off a big bill that needed to be dealt with and she'd been putting it off. And she said, it was so interesting. I had been putting it off and putting it off. And as soon as I did it, my mind immediately said, okay, well, now we have to. It never, like, she never took a moment to just say, hey, I got that done. To other people, might not seem big, but since it had been hanging over her head as a big thing, she never gave herself a moment to say, way to go, give yourself an atta girl. We do that so often. We might set a great goal for ourselves and achieve it. Well, let's see, I want to learn to paddleboard or something like that. You learn how to do it, and before you know it, you're on to the next goal. But we never sit and give ourselves a chance to acknowledge the wins. And sometimes journaling, even if you're not a journaler, just making notes at the end of each day of things that went well or something you did that you hadn't expected to do, or yeah, just giving writing down your wins for the day. We do that with kids. People often do it with kids. We do it with our kids. We have them, when we can get them to eat at the table with us, what went well today, what did you think was going to not go well and you got surprised, just kind of we don't call it gratitude. I know a lot of people like gratitude journals. Some people don't, they feel like that's too hard. I've got to be grateful. Sometimes it's just, let's just talk about the wins.
I love journaling. Journaling happens to be something that I do consistently and have done for years because I have a lot of thoughts. I'm that person that's always thinking. I'm thinking about everything all of the time. And so it's a place for me to dump, but I have noticed that I try not to. One of the practices I do, and I think you should be completely honest in your journal, but I sometimes choose not to put maybe a negative memory or a negative perspective in my journal because I'm trying to make a shift. This is just me. like, okay, something went down. Maybe I didn't like the way it went down. And I'm like, I don't want to record that in history, if you will. Like, it's my way of saying, yeah, it happened, but I don't have to give it credit. Like, I don't have to give it any more time than it took out of my life. I might process it with someone, or I might process it in my journal, or I might just choose to say, you know what? Today overall was a good day. I think there's honoring our feelings. This is just my perspective. I like to honor my feelings, but I also like to keep an eye out for when something is got the shadows of something I'm trying to rid my mindset of.
I agree wholeheartedly. And because that's not a head in the sand kind of mentality, in my opinion. It's just, yeah, honoring the positive and keeping it moving. It's a far cry from ignoring, something that happened. Like you said, you process it with a friend or give it some thought and try to figure out how you would do something differently, or how it really impacts you. So it's not swallowing your emotions. It's just, yeah, like you said, choosing not to breathe big life into something negative. I love that. Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. Don't breathe life into the things that don't serve you. And I think when we reach this point in life, there are a lot of things that may have served us, maybe not necessarily super healthy, like they worked, they did their job. And maybe for a season it was okay. But I think these are the things that, like an ill-fitting shoe, I think that's why a lot of relationships struggle, really, because we have an idea and we don't grow with the relationship, or we don't grow with the situation.
Absolutely.
We go for the comfort, we go for the routine in our own lives and in our relationships. And it's hard to grow. And I don't want to say this negatively, so let me just fix that. It will take work to grow, but you're working hard to hang on to a story that's causing you to suffer. So which kind of struggle do I want? The
Right.
one of hanging on to what I don't like, or getting curious and having courage to begin to shift? That's how I try to help people understand that you're going to struggle in life. Do you want to struggle this way, or would you like to struggle in a direction that feels more aligned?
Absolutely. Yeah. And struggling to make your life happier, in just the most simplistic terms, to make your life happier seems like the better choice than to struggle to just get by. Right. And you're absolutely right. I mean, in my work with people getting divorced, of course, that's something that I saw constantly. And again, I didn't go into the business thinking that I would be working with people's feelings. It sounds crazy that I didn't realize that, but I was a finance person, so I was, blinders, head down. But yeah, that was the biggest thing, is that I noticed, was that people had spent, or the women I worked with, so many of them had spent so long being a particular kind of person in order to maintain the status quo of the relationship, whatever that looked like. It didn't mean that necessarily they were doing anything wrong, but very often they weren't being true or genuine to themselves. Maybe they started out that way, but as they evolved as people, they didn't evolve who they were in the relationship. And so then everything gets out of line, and you're just kind of left with a person that you don't recognize, or maybe sometimes don't even like. People that I end up, I tend to work with people who are acknowledging that they're not happy with who they are right now, and they can kind of envision where they want to be, but just need a little help getting clarity about what value, and what you value about yourself, and what your strengths are. Again, as women, busy people, we don't often stop and think about that either. Who am I really? Who could I be? What am I good at? Really good at, not just the things I've had to be good at, you know?
Yeah, it's like, what can you do?
Mhm.
Or what would you do?
Yeah. What would you do if there were no constraints? I love that. And I'm sure you've done that, just as a project. What would I do if there were no constraints whatsoever? And it's how there, it's probably wildly different from, as you mentioned before, than when you were much younger.
Mm.
But also sometimes they're much more comforting. They're not as huge, honestly. There's something, a lot of people will say that they want to travel a lot. Um, and a lot of people will say that they want to start their own business. But when you really start asking deep questions, the things that are important to people are much more close to home, much more personal than big that you can hold on to, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I described that very well, but when we really have these conversations and really dig in, a lot of times it's much more cozy than the grand big ideas. But there's nothing wrong with the grand big ideas.
And feeling it, thinking about how does it feel? How do I want to feel? Because I don't like living a life based on emotions because emotions change. But a big part of why we enjoy something is how it makes us feel. And so it's a way of connecting with an idea, like a job, right? You see someone, they're doing a job and you think, I would hate that job.
Right.
You instantly know that you'd be like, I would rather not do that thing.
Right.
And so that's what I'm talking about, thinking about what kind of feels right now in terms of, if I could do anything, what would feel right at this point in this moment. We don't have to, maybe we need to think through where it will lead us, but just trying things and being curious about things. One of the things that in my mind, like to caution people is sometimes people feel like, well, if I need to change this thing about myself, and I need to change everything in my life. Right. I've met people, it's like, well, everything was fine, but I wasn't happy. So I divorced my husband. I moved across the country. I changed my job. I lost or gained weight, whatever, like changed the color of my hair. And I'm like, whoa, it does not have to be all of that. I mean, I suppose it could, but in my world, it's like, okay, I don't think you need to flip your life upside down in order to get where you want to go. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It often comes a little bit less dramatically, at least in my thoughts.
Because a great analogy, it's kind of like a science experiment, right? Or a math equation. When in math, you've got your variables and you've got your fixed things. You don't change everything. You're never going to get the answer. It's just like with a science experiment, you don't just throw all the things in there and see if no, you do one thing at a time. You have a recipe. Yeah. So I agree. And I've come across people like that, or not so much that they've done it, but that's what they have on the list. This is where I'm going. I'm going to do all of these things. And it's necessary, but it's born of sometimes not taking the time to just sit and think and feel. To your point, what is it that I need to change? What is it that's making me unhappy, or what is it that I'm trying to escape? Because that's escapism. That's just shedding the whole life in a way, and that's, as you pointed out, rarely necessary.
Yeah. I think we do, when it comes to change, it is a scary thing for some people because it is technically an unknown. But I find that courage comes as you do the work. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, it's just like confidence or anything else, any kind of muscle that you build. The more you do it, the better you get at it, the stronger you are.
Mm-hmm. Have you found, as you help people work through their mindset, it shifts their relationships and kind of ripples out?
Yes, resounding yes. That's absolutely true. And sometimes, I have found in a number of circumstances that the reason they came to me, or came to a coach in the first place, was because they were well aware that would probably be something that happens. Because sometimes when you can tell when you talk to your family members or the people that know you the best, your close friends, you can tell when there's a little bit of pushback in terms of any kind of change in you. It doesn't, it makes people nervous. And they may not even realize it consciously, but you can tell by the things that they reflect back to you or things that they say, that they're maybe not 100% on board with you, I don't know, quitting your job and becoming an ice skater, that may not resound with them. Or they may not be on board with changing the relationship that they have with you. So that's a lot of the reason why people come to someone external, because again, a lot of these little activities to kind of realize more about yourself, you can do with somebody that you know. But very often you don't feel comfortable doing that because you're about to maybe blow up the house a little bit, which is fine. It's fine. Everybody will be okay.
Sometimes beautiful things come out of it too. There are maybe elements in a relationship that have never been tapped into because no one has changed anything for 20 years,
Absolutely. That's how we get to the end of relationships. Maybe both people are stuck in the roles that they've been playing and nobody makes a move. Or maybe one person gets stuck and the other person wants to make a move. And that's when there's friction. That's the kind of, if everybody goes along happily, that's fine. If no one wants to evolve, well, don't. But that's rare. Everybody evolves over time in their lives. And I think that's what I've seen. That's been my experience with people that I've worked with. The end of the relationship shows the biggest friction point where we just can no longer, we just don't fit like the pegs that we thought we into when we were however many years ago when we got married. Yeah. So that's interesting.
Which is, it probably did fit. We're not wrong. It's just we're in a different season of life now.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody wants to have the opportunity to evolve. Typically, most people do.
So now if you had to give 3 takeaways for people, things you want them to know, maybe apply to their lives, what would those 3 things be, Alison?
Oh, wow. 3 things. Let's see. Well, we talked about resilience, and I think resilience is one of the most important qualities that we as human beings can have. And building that is just a matter of gaining confidence. I think gaining confidence and that strength eventually leads to resiliency. It's just like I said, just like any kind of muscle, the more you use something, the more strong it becomes. And that's what creates resilience. Your confidence in your ability to come up against whatever the next thing is, and whether it's an obstacle or a fear, and be able to manage through it. So that thing. Another is to don't always believe what your head's telling you. And I think we talked about that extensively. And that I would say is probably one of the most difficult things. You really do have to put forth effort to not let your little inner critics just rule your world. And that's what they do. They were designed to keep us safe, right? I mean, but we don't need them to keep us safe from everything. So don't believe everything that you hear. Question whether it's right or wrong, or whether it's true. And the last thing is to give yourself room to use your imagination. I think sometimes we're so afraid of, we kind of talked about that, like big sky thinking. We give ourselves so many rules and regulations and stipulations and blinders that we don't let our imaginations. Nothing more lovely than to watch little kids when they just create new things out of nothing. We still have the ability to do that. We can, and we can create our next life just out of whole cloth from our heads. So yeah, use your imagination.
Awesome. So Alison, how can people find you?
You can email me. If you want to contact me, you can email me at Alison with 1 L at changeagentcoaching.com. You can check out my website. It's also changeagentcoaching.com. I have a joint venture with a psychologist, and it's theboldestme.com. So if you have inner critic things that you'd like to work out, we are there for you. I'm also on LinkedIn. It's Alison Hall Coach Women. So pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Well, Alison, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today and to open up the minds of my listeners and myself to these ways that we can do better and be better and think better, so that our ability to live this life more fully can happen. It's such a big conversation. I'm grateful for the work you've done, and thank you for bringing that to the table today.
Thank you so much, Gina. This has been such a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Friends, today, if you find us on YouTube, just look down below. All those links that she talked about and the email will be down there for you. If you happen to be on a podcast platform and you are driving, you can head to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 342, and all the notes will be there, the links and everything that you need. Friends, this conversation is one that is legitimately a lifetime conversation. It's not a one-time conversation. This is a journey that we can choose to make to continually challenge the thoughts that we think, the things we say to and about ourselves, and the things we say about the relationships that we're in. It's time to take these things to court, my friends, to really challenge them and recognize whether or not they are in fact serving us in this moment. Are they improving us? Are they improving our relationships? Are they improving the way that we show up in the world? Our minds are so powerful. It is so impactful what you think and what you choose to allow into your mind, in your ears every day, and what comes out of your mouth. Honestly, friends, this is one of those things that we do without thinking. Literally happens, like Alison said, millions of thoughts a day. Many of them we're not even aware of. So why not wrangle a few of those thoughts and bring them into submission and move them in a direction that make you better, that make your world better, that make you feel better and do better. Mindset is something we do have an impact on. And of course, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to myself or Alison, or find someone who can help you process it in a way that serves you well. Thank you so much for being with us today. I look forward to sharing more inspirational people, conversations, and strategies with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.